on Facebook. Let's go live. Let's do YouTube. YouTube, let's go live. All right, we're live on YouTube, Facebook, and Periscope. Chat. Close this. All right. Well, let me just also press record. Okay, cool. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Yaron Brook Show from broadcasting from Puerto Rico. I'm in San Juan after my trip to long trip to London and to a little bit in Denver. And what we're doing today is this is a special show for those who whoops, we got one more person who's just joined, Space Wanderer. I'm not sure who Space Wanderer is. Maybe they'll introduce themselves. But we've got a show today, especially for those who are contributing $100 or more to the Yaron Brook Show on Patreon. So if you want to join this select group, just go to patreon.com, Yaron Brook Show, and you can join us. We've got 2, 4, 6, 7. We've got 7 of our contributors. We've also got Angela with us, who makes everything I do possible, and then we're streaming this live on Facebook and YouTube, and it will go up on Blog Talk Radio as well. So welcome to all those of you viewing live. And what we're going to do is we're basically going to make this a Q&A. So I hope you guys who've dialed in have some questions to ask or some comments to make, so that we could have an interesting conversation. This is your opportunity for not quite one-on-one with me, but close to one-on-one with me. So feel free. All right, we got one more. Who did we get? Okay, I think Ursula dropped in his back. So all right. So I think we've got everybody. So those of you who are live, this is what's missing. You could be here for $100. Okay, let me just say before we get started, before I go to questions, that I've got to say thank you to Antifa today, because I assume all of you know that they demonstrated at my event with Sargon of Akkad last week. They stopped the event, they shut it down. But the fact is, we probably, if everything had gone smoothly, we probably would have had 200 plus people at the event. I think as it is, the videos of the disruption are being seen by hundreds of thousands of people. I got about, 1,300 additional subscribes on YouTube, about close to 1,000 or 600 to 1,000 new followers on Twitter. And it seemed like there was a little uptick on Patreon. So overall, it seems like Antifa did me a favor and increased my exposure. A lot of people said they discovered me and my channel because of what Antifa did. So big thanks. Good show. All right. Other than that, I'm going to open it up. So if one of you has a question, just jump in, just unmute and jump in, and don't be shy, because otherwise we'll have a lot of silence here. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
All right. Hey, Jennifer.
Hi.
Hey.
I wanted to ask, when you were talking to Dr. Thompson a couple weeks ago, and you were talking about how school, the way they teach the kids, they don't prepare them to be adults and to face the world. And I was also thinking about, those laws they have now where if the parent lets the kid walk to the park, the parent was getting arrested and stuff like that. And it's like, when we were kids, we used to run around like wild animals. I mean, do you think that has something to do with it too? Why these kids feel so afraid of everything? And
yeah, no, I think that's right. So just to be clear, in terms of what we discussed with Brad Thompson, is it's not just that they're not being prepared to be adults. They're not being prepared to be adults in a specific way. They're not being trained to think. They're not being encouraged to think. What's being encouraged and what's being developed is their emotional life. They're being trained to feel instead of being trained to think. They're being trained that there is no such thing as an absolute reality and absolute knowledge. What there ultimately is just their emotions. And I think that the whole attitude, and it's not just the law, it's really parents, of coddling their kids, of not letting them go anywhere by themselves, of not playing outside, of not interacting with reality in a sense, but more interacting with a digital reality, but not being free to go out and interact with the world, is again, we're coddling their emotions. We're protecting them from what? Because our educational system and because the parents have not trained the kids to think, which means they're not trained the kids to deal with the world, to deal with the facts, to deal with reality. Here we are now with kids who have no clue, and this is also the consequence. The consequence of this is also this whole snowflake generation and Antifa and the idea that you can't say anything that might offend them, right? Because what's primary is not their reason, not hearing new ideas, integrating them, thinking about them, and coming up with an argument against. The whole mechanism by which they interact is emotion. So what you can't do is you can't offend them, you can't insult them, you can't make them feel bad in any kind of way. And I think it's all related: the coddling, the risk aversion, the overly protectiveness, if that's a word, and then the educational system that doesn't teach them how to deal with really anything. All of that is related and is related to the state of the world we live in, and to so many of them becoming nihilists, whether that manifests itself in Antifa, the alt-right, or in school shootings, or in just being depression. Depression is off the charts among young people these days. I think these are all consequences of the educational system and what you just said, the coddling of parents.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Anybody else?
Yaron, I've got one. I don't know if I'm off mute though.
No, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, good. Could you speak to, as objectivists, what we mean by spiritual values, and do you characterize us as spiritual people in some sense?
Yes, I do. I do characterize us as spiritual people, and I do talk a lot about spiritual values. Spiritual values for me are values, not non-material values, values of consciousness, values that relate to a state of consciousness. So music, I think, is a spiritual value. It's non-material. It relates to pleasure, enjoyment that one gets, and values that one gets from the particular state of consciousness one experiences while listening to music. I think art generally is a spiritual value. It manifests itself not in something physical that we enjoy, but in something spiritual that we enjoy, something in consciousness that we enjoy. So I definitely think we're spiritual. I think we're truly spiritual in that sense. I mean, Ayn Rand talks about the fact that religion, that certain values, religion seems to have a monopoly over, right? It's not certain values, certain concepts, certain words, like sacred, or like spiritual. There are others, and I can't remember off the top.
Soul, perhaps.
Or having a soul. And that she says that's wrong. It's what's happened is, in a sense, religion dominates the realm of the spirit, the realm of consciousness, and Marxism dominates the realm of material. And that's a dichotomy we have. But we objectivists don't leave the material to the Marxists, and we don't leave the spiritual to the religionists. And there's definitely, to every life, there is a spiritual as well as material component. If you go, and to every virtue in objectivism, there is a material component, a material application, a material reward, and a spiritual component, a spiritual application, and a spiritual reward.
Do this again.
That makes sense? Any follow-up?
Makes a lot of sense. Yes. When you said the state of consciousness, that helped me a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, it's in a sense what's in your head, but it's your state of consciousness.
And a lot of things are a combination. I think you were saying of both physical and spiritual, right?
Almost everything is ultimately, right? So sex is a good example. Sex is both a very physical, very intensely physical experience, but at the same time, good sex at least has an immense spiritual component and is an experience of consciousness as well. So yes, I think all of these values. I mean, look at a beautiful sculpture. Again, it's in physical reality, but its impact on you is spiritual.
And then we would say, could you say spiritual, but certainly in a in a naturalistic way or a supernatural way?
Yeah, but I think if we say that, it grants religion too much, right? Why do they get a monopoly over this?
Right.
I see no reason why they should have the monopoly over this. So from my perspective, we just say spiritual, and and that's it, so that we don't grant them kind of too much influence and too much power. Right? They don't get the word. We get the word.
Oh,
We get the concept.
sorry.
Thank you. Good.
Here, just take mine. You take it.
Any other questions?
Thanks.
I have another.
Sure. Jump in.
Could you talk about the morality of late-term abortions?
The morality or the legality?
The morality. Well, both, I think.
Well, I mean, I think they're two separate issues. I think morality, I think it's probably pretty rare that a late-term abortion is legal unless one of two factors are in play. One is the mother's health is in danger because of the pregnancy, or second, the fetus is going to be born with some massive birth defect. I think those two are moral reasons to have a late-term abortion. I guess the third would be the woman didn't know she was pregnant until the late, but that's weird and unusual, but it happens. I hear it happens, particularly teenagers. They just don't know. They think they're putting on weight, and they're just totally ignorant. But anybody else, you've got 6 months to figure this out. And you've got 6 months to know that you're pregnant and to decide whether you want it or not. And indeed, a late-term abortion is somewhat dangerous. It's not a simple procedure, whereas an early-term abortion is very safe. It's a procedure that most doctors won't even perform. So it's very rare that a doctor will actually perform a late-term abortion. So from my perspective, morality is about being rational, right? Morality is about thinking things through and acting rationally. And you've had 6 months to do it, do it. Now, legally, I don't think there's any prohibition. Again, the law's purpose is not to legalize morality. It's to protect individual rights. And there is no individual rights there's no individual rights of a fetus. There's no individual rights until, in my view, there's a birth, and it becomes individuated, and it is a separate entity from the mother. As long as it's in the womb, it is not a separate entity, and therefore does not gain rights. So there's an issue of morality, and then there's an issue of legality. But again, for the most part, the whole issue of late-term abortions is a red herring, because there are very few late-term abortions. Very few doctors are willing to do them because they're complicated and they're unpleasant. It's definitely an unpleasant thing to do. To a large extent, because the fetus does look like a baby, and the doctor doesn't want to, deal with it, right? So it is unpleasant, and therefore there are very few of them. So I think the whole abortion argument is not about late-term abortions. The whole abortion argument is about early-term abortions. And that's what they're really objecting to, the idea of life beginning at birth and the idea of the sanctity, the sanctity from a religious perspective of life. And therefore you can't have abortion even in the first term. That's where the argument really is. Late-term abortions, as I said, are very rare.
Thank you. Very good.
Most women are not willing to have an abortion once they're feeling the baby moving independently and stuff.
Who is this? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Carrying it for 7 months, for crying out loud.
Yeah, who is this? Adrena? Hello? Hello? Who was that?
I don't know.
I think it was Adrena. I mean, absolutely. I think almost no woman, certainly no rational woman, once they feel the fetus inside of them, once they've carried them. I mean, it's not easy. You've gone through morning sickness. You've gone through everything, the discomfort, everything that's involved in carrying, through 6-7 months. And now you can have an abortion. I mean, it's just the only reason to do it again would be if your life is in danger, or if there's suddenly you've discovered that the fetus is really gonna suffer in their life. And usually those kind of discoveries happen earlier. That's why you do an ultrasound early. That's why you do genetic testing. I think you do genetic testing post 3 months, but before 6 months. So all of that is taken care of. So it really is the last trimester. It really is the red herring that they present. All right. Anybody else want to jump in with a question?
Yaron, I had a question on free will. Are there degrees of free will? Does an adult have more free will than a child, have more free will than an infant? And at what point does a human actually develop the capacity for free will?
I think you're asking me a question above my pay grade. I don't think so. I think that's an on-off switch. And what you're turning on has degrees, right? So what you're turning on is your capacity to reason and to think and to integrate and to deal with the material from the outside. But I think it's an on-off, but once you're on, the degrees to which you're engaged, right? So the on is basically saying, I'm going to use my reason. I'm going to focus, and I'm going to focus when necessary. I'm on standby mode. I'm ready, right? It doesn't mean you're actually doing the math problem. You're ready to do the math problem, or it doesn't mean you're necessarily ready to absorb everything going around, because you might be resting, or you might be watching TV or something like that. You might be in a relaxation mode, but you're still on. Your mind is ready to be engaged. That's how I understand the on button. I'm ready to focus. Now, so I think you can be, they're very in terms of how focused you are at any given point in time. That is degrees, right? So again, you could be relaxing where you're not very focused at all. You could be, vegging in front of the TV where hopefully you're somewhat focused, but not completely focused, depending on the quality of the TV show in front of you. But I think the fundamental is, I'm available, right? It's available to me. That ability to engage, to integrate, to be in reality, to be in the moment is available to you. And I think that's the essential of free will. Again, free will is not about raising your arm. It's not about the typical things that people talk about. It's about the choice to think or not to think. It's the choice to engage with reality, to be there, to be in the moment, integrating and observing and thinking and reasoning, really reasoning, which entails sensory perception all the way through thinking, right? So that's the fundamental. And then I think there's degrees to the extent that you do that. But that's not the fundamental in free will. But again, I'll have somebody like Greg Salamieri on the show, and that's a good question to ask him with a detail.
Dr. Locke just has a book out.
Yes, Dr. Locke has a book out. I haven't seen it yet, but is it available for sale already?
I think so. I got the ebook, but it seems like the print book was coming out a little later. I don't know. I've got it.
Yeah, so Edlock has a book on free will that just came out. I have not seen it, but it's out. I probably should download it and get a copy. But yeah, I mean, I think the whole issue of free will is an interesting issue, and certainly there's a lot of interest in this, primarily because some relatively good thinkers like Sam Harris and other people don't believe in free will, which is bizarre, given that they use it all the time, and they have they reason. They're pretty rational. Anybody else?
This is Jennifer. I have another one.
All right.
They were talking recently in the news about mental health and owning a gun.
Yep.
And I was thinking, if you haven't done anything violent or threatened violence, it kind of makes me nervous, the thought of the government determining who's mentally ill. I mean, they used to send people to Siberia for being supposedly mentally ill. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, how do you determine that?
Yeah, I think it's tricky to determine it, and it's not easy, and I hate thinking about the government doing that either, but I think but on the other hand, it also scares the hell out of me that somebody is a known schizophrenic and can go into a gun shop and buy a gun. That doesn't make any sense to me either. Or if somebody is, has expressed homicidal tendencies, who's being violent, has expressed violent thoughts, hasn't been violent, gets a gun. So I think somebody has to make that call, and we can think about who should make that call and how do you make that call. But I do not think that somebody who is seriously has a real mental problem should be able to own a gun. It's just again, I think guns are special, and I know a lot of objectivists disagree with me. But I'm not guns. Guns again. The purpose of guns is violence, and I'm not defining a gun by saying that the only purpose of a gun is the only real purpose of a gun is to kill people. But that's its purpose, right? They teach you when you buy a gun and you go through the training. What do they teach you? First thing they teach you is never point a gun at somebody unless you're willing to kill them, because you don't shoot to injure, you don't shoot to maim, and you don't point just to threaten. You point with a full willingness to pull that trigger right between his eyes, although you aim at the chest, because almost none of us are good enough shots to hit anybody between the eyes. I mean, that's the reason. If you can aim between the eyes, what you want to do is put them down. You want to do is kill them. You don't want them, injured and really angry at you, right? You don't want an injured animal. You want to kill them. So that's the purpose of a gun. And therefore, I think the government has every responsibility, as part of its responsibilities over the monopoly, over the use of retaliatory force, to figure out who cannot or should not own a gun, and what guns we should be able to carry and what guns you shouldn't be able to carry. It's part of their responsibility over the monopoly, over the use of force, to regulate, if you will, the instruments whose only purpose. Somebody said, well, a butcher knife could be used for murdering. Yes, but it's note in the name. It's a butcher knife. It's used for butchering meat. Yes, a pen, if you watch Godfather 3, a pen can be used to kill people, right? Lots of instruments can be used to kill people, but the only one that's sole purpose of creating it is to kill people is a gun. And that is the one instrument that the government has a role in regulating. How exactly you regulate it, I've said this many times before, is a job to be defined by philosophers of law, not by me. And Ayn Rand said the same thing. And for those of you who are not sure what Ayn Rand thought about this, get Ayn Rand's Q&A, which was edited by Robin Mayhew, where she talks in Q&A. She never thought it was an important enough issue to write an essay about it, where she talks about the fact that this is something that's complex and that philosophers of law are going to have to delve into and figure it out. I have not figured it out. I'm not a philosopher of law, but it does strike me that mental health would be a category.
Thank you.
Sure.
Can I ask along those lines?
Sure.
This is Reed.
Hi, Adriana. Hopefully you can hear us.
Hi.
Yes, she can hear us. Great. All right. Go ahead. Go ahead and ask.
I was going to ask, Reed, is it okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the shooting in Parkland, and these kids from the high school, you know, they got very, very involved. And my feeling was that that it was good that they got involved in terms of motivation. You know, they're saying, hey, I want you adults to do something about this to protect us. But it seems to have gone farther than that, whereas actually we're listening to these kids for the solution.
Yeah.
And I think it's way above their pay grade to tell us what the solutions are.
It's definitely above their pay grade. But look, I mean, a few things I'd observe here. One is the adults are not having a conversation. The adults are yelling at one another, and the adults, there's no actual conversation about guns. The people who thinks everybody should be able to own an F-16 dominate the one party, right? How dare the government intervene in anything? I have an absolute right to own any weapon I want. There should be nothing. That's one. And the other extreme is we should ban all guns, which is on the left. And there's no discussion. There's no debate. There's no argument. There's just yelling at one another. And, you know, these kids, again, they're trained to emote, they're trained to feel, and they're taking a position and they're being activists, which I think is all good. But they can't make a rational, argued position on these things. They're becoming mini celebrities. And again, it's an appeal to emotion, like everything else. And it's, you know, at least they seem like, what do you call it? You know, attractive messages for a cause, right? Because they're kids. But yeah, there's absolutely no reason why we should take a 16-year-old's view on guns into account. Although, of course, we let 18-year-olds vote. So in 2 years, their view will count at least somewhat. Yeah, I don't think it's interesting, particularly what 14 or 16 or certainly 5 or 7-year-olds have to think about a complex political issue. But look, when they were little kids in school, they put them around a table and they were told around this table, what do you think about X? And the whole educational system, the whole progressive educational system encourages kind of asking kids to think and emote and express their emotions about things they have no understanding of. And we give them ribbons when they do that, and we give them rewards. That's what progressive education is about. It's about letting kids emote and letting kids have a point of view about things that they cannot have a point of view about. They don't have, children do not have opinions because they don't know enough. A 16-year-old has opinions, but we shouldn't take them too seriously because they don't know enough. Now, I was 16 once, and no, nobody should have paid attention to me because I was a obnoxious kid who just read Atlas Shrugged and who thought he knew everything about the world. And I was an idiot. So that's just as true of these kids, right?
That's funny.
When I was 16. But... All right.
I would have still liked to have known you.
Who else?
I don't have a question per se, but ever since the talk with Brad, I've just been interested in you chewing the education, like the education generally, but yeah, I don't have a question. It was just if you had any other views or any other thoughts that you haven't talked about yet.
I mean, I
It's
think
nothing.
we
Can't
went along with
really
Brad.
get you started with that, but
Yeah, I mean, the key is, I think, to understand how important education is, how fundamental it is, and I recommend everybody listen to Dr. Peikoff's philosophy of education, which I think is available for free on campus. So you can all access the philosophy of education for free, and I encourage you to do so because it really is a terrific course, and he covers a lot of this. Also, I would also encourage everybody to go listen to Leonard's Why Johnny Can't Think, right? There was a famous book about why Johnny can't read, and I'm saying, are you pulling out why Johnny can't think? There, why Johnny can't. Oh,
Teaching Johnny to think.
Teaching Johnny to think, which is
Yeah.
a transcription, edited transcription of the philosophy of education course, plus Leonard Peacock talks on education. And Leonard in his talks is often attributed a lot of the mental health problems that we have in the world in which we live, the schizophrenia, the depression, all this rest stuff, to education, to progressive education. It's exactly what Brad was talking about. The idea that we encourage and teach people to emote, that we focus on socialization and not teaching them to think or teaching them facts, knowledge, is having a massive detrimental effect on these kids and on their state of mind and on their self-esteem and on their ability to deal with reality. And in extreme cases, that manifests itself in real mental health problems. And these mental health problems, I mean, Leonard actually goes through and shows you how the mental health problems are directly related to some of the stuff that they learn. If there's no reality, there's no reality, then what is the schizophrenic supposed to anchor? You know, if you're not anchored to anything, that can lead you towards. Now, other things I think have to happen, and I'm no psychologist or psychiatrist, other things have to happen, but that in general is, it is the educational system that is responsible for so much of the problems we have today.
Yaron, you yourself were a professor for a long time at Santa Clara University. What made you decide to leave that?
I got an offer I couldn't refuse. I mean, basically, I got the offer to run the Ayn Rand Institute, which was too good to turn down. So that was in late 1999. I was still a professor, and I got the offer to teach. I also did not get tenure for a variety of reasons. I didn't get tenure at the university, but I didn't pursue another academic career, another academic job, because I got the job at the Institute, which was a dream job.
At the level that you were teaching at, did you find that students still had a hard time thinking, or do you think they had self-selected into?
No, they were idiots. I mean, not idiots, but yeah, they definitely were having. They definitely couldn't integrate. They had motivation problems. They were too young to be in college. They didn't know anything about the world. Too young and ignorant to be in college, in my view, and too unmotivated to be in college. And this was a decent university. It was Santa Clara University, a private school, Jesuit university, so expensive. Their parents were paying a lot of money for them to attend. And no, I don't think, I think you could definitely see the consequence of a rotten educational system. And I got a better education because I went to school in Israel, which had more of a British educational system, didn't really have most of the elements of progressive education. And, we actually studied. Now, I don't think the Israeli educational system was necessarily good because the teachers weren't very good. It wasn't integrated. Knowledge wasn't integrated. One of the things that almost nobody does is to integrate knowledge, which is so crucial for life and for knowing anything. So, yeah, I definitely saw it in my students. They couldn't really think clearly. I used to argue with them about things that they had no reason to believe they knew anything about. Right. And yet I was the professor, and they would argue with me about stuff that they had no right to have an opinion about because they were ignorant. And it didn't matter. To them, ignorance didn't matter, right? If I feel like this, then it is, right? So during the dot-com bubble, this is during the 90s, I had students who would literally tell me, for stock valuation, it didn't matter whether a company was profitable or would ever be profitable. All that matters is that they grew. They never had to make money. And it just boggled my mind. And you would argue with them and you would prove them mathematically and every other way that this was an impossibility. And it didn't matter to them because they felt like, it didn't matter, right? This was the vibe. This was the energy around 1998, 99, early 2000, around dot-coms.
They just picked it up somewhere and.
Well, no, I mean, a lot of people were writing about it, they were reading about it, they picked it up, and it felt good because it meant that all these stupid .com companies that all went bankrupt, there was reason for them to exist, and there was reason for them to have the valuations they did, and it was their generation, it was their thing. These were startups. It's like you talk to somebody today, and they think, well, I mean, it was worse in a sense, but because those were much simpler. But it's like somebody today who thinks, I don't know, Bitcoin is worth fill in the blank. Because anytime anybody says Bitcoin is worth X, they don't know what they're talking about, because literally nobody knows what Bitcoin is worth.
Yaron?
There's no way to figure that out. Jonathan, is that you?
Yeah, could I ask a question on a different topic if possible?
Sure, of course.
Just quickly, if you wouldn't mind, on trade, I'm obviously really dismayed about the tariffs, and not just the tariffs, the reaction to the tariffs. There just seems to be no coherent response, despite the fact that a lot of people profess to disliking them. I'm wondering, what do you think is the best strategy now to kind of combat this type of politics, and why is it that so many people now see free markets as a disadvantage, that somehow it's hurting us, it's a hindrance rather than a help? Thank you.
I agree with you. I find not so much the tariffs themselves, because I expected them, and other presidents have done somewhat similar things, and at the end of the day, these particular tariffs are not going to cause a disaster necessarily. What really dismays these is the response to them. The way people have responded, the rationalizations, the support, people who know better. And then the people who really know better, who know that the tariffs are always a disaster, always bad, never good. There's no upside to tariffs, zero. They're silent. The Wall Street Journal should be running an op-ed every single day about the tariffs. Professors in economics everywhere should be writing constantly letters to editorials, left and right. This is not even an issue that's Democrat or Republican. Nobody with a PhD in economics, except some fringe weirdos, believes that tariffs are a good thing. Nobody. I mean, Paul Krugman got his Nobel Prize when he was an economist a long time ago, for a paper defending free trade. So left, right doesn't matter here. And they're silent. They're all silent, right? And when they are vocal, it's partisans, like the Democrats attacking Republicans. It's not economics. It's not showing the insanity of this. And then, of course, objectivists who should be anti-trade, not even because of economics, because economics is not relevant, but on the basis of individual rights. I see so many objectivists turning themselves into pretzels to try to justify these tariffs. It's just nutty and crazy and insane, right? Chinese are violating their people's individual rights by subsidizing their industry. So we should violate the individual rights of Americans by putting tariffs on those goods. I won't even go into the idea that we in America don't subsidize our stuff as if we're somehow some kind of laissez-faire capitalist utopia, and the Chinese, they were a mixed economy and evil them, when we're just a mixed economy and they're just a mixed economy. They're more mixed than we are. They have more elements of socialism than we are, but it's a matter of degree. It's not a matter of principle. So why is this? I think a lot of it is cowardice. I think that the world has moved. I mean, so historically, almost nobody understood in the public. People don't understand economics. 90% of the people who make economic statements don't understand economics. Economics is a science. It's like me going out there and making statements in physics, right? But yet everybody in the world thinks that they can go out there and have an opinion and have statements about economics as if they know or understand anything about economics. So I think people have always and are always ignorant of economics. But what has happened is you now have a vocal element on the left and a vocal element on the right that have, call them populist views on economics and tariffs. They're very pro-tariffs, left and right. The Bernie Sanders is hugely pro-tariffs. Bernie Sanders, if he doesn't support Donald Trump's tariffs, he's just being a hypocrite because he clearly is a pro-tariffs guy. His supporters are pro-tariffs. And then Donald Trump is hugely supportive of tariffs, and he has a huge audience of those who support kind of a populist, so-called American nationalist economic policy, the Steve Bannon economic nationalism type approach. And I think that both mainstream Republicans and mainstream Democrats and those affiliated with them are afraid to alienate these groups because these groups are the most active and the most inspired in their communities. So they are the most energized. So they're staying quiet. Now, why aren't economists speaking? Because economists never speak, because economists are a coward, because they're afraid of other people in their profession, because they don't want to get involved in public policy, because they'd be perceived as being pro-Democrats or pro-Republicans or pro-something. So they are, it's an unequivocal disaster. It's just, and when I read comments on Facebook, it's so depressing. It really is so depressing. I mean, where is the Milton Friedman of today who will stand up and call the bullshit? There's nobody of that prominence, of that stature within the realm of economics today to call this. I mean, you've got a few economists, particularly out of George Mason. I don't know, Don Boudreaux is somebody, even though I think even though he's an advocate of anarchism and there's some things I really disagree with him, I got to give him credit for the fact that he is standing up for free trade when everybody else is capitulating. And there are a number of other economists who are doing that, but it's the tiniest minority. And it truly is. I mean, I know, Jonathan, you're on Fox a lot, and these Fox commentators and these Fox people are supposed to be and claimed in the past to be pro free markets, and they've abandoned that. Now, let me just add this to answer, I think, part of your question. Part of it is, look, the 2008 crisis, I think, has done a huge amount of damage. I mean, huge amount of damage to the spirit of Americans, to our confidence. And what people learned from the 2008 crisis, again, because not enough of us stood up and talked, Jonathan and me are among the exceptions where we did talk in public about it, but too many people did not. People assume the 2008 crisis, a whole generation assumes the 2008 crisis was caused by capitalism, that capitalism failed, that free markets failed. Now, I think on this group, all know that is a fantasy, that is nuts, that is insane. But that is the conclusion the culture came to. And at the same time, they looked at China growing at 9, 10, 11, 12%, and concluded from that China's growth was a result of state policy, of central planning. That's also false. If you don't believe me, get a book called How China Became Capitalist. It's a bad title. It's a wrong title, but the book is excellent. How China Became Capitalist, written by Ronald Coase, the famous economist. So they've learned two myths, and they're really ingrained myths now. Now that I go to high schools and colleges and speak, everybody believes this. Everybody believes this, including a lot of the professors believe this. So they believe that the model of laissez-faire has failed and works no more. And actually, the Chinese model has worked. And now we have to compete with China. So we have to compete with China by partially adopting elements of its model. And I think that's what we're doing. So there's nobody out there, almost nobody out there, who has a principled advocacy and defense for laissez-faire capitalism, for a real free market, and an understanding that even in the kind of mixed economy that we have today, us holding on to free markets is a better solution morally and economically for us trying to mimic the Chinese in anything. But I don't know, Donald Trump, I mean, this is, I know a lot of you will resent this, but Donald Trump has brought out the worst in the American people. Donald Trump has brought out the worst in the American people. He's brought out the ignorant, the emotional, the collectivistic, the tribal, the non-thinking, anti-principles, anti-capitalist mentality that unfortunately exists out there among Americans. And he's done that. And maybe that will be, I think, unfortunately, I think that might be his legacy, is of unleashing upon us all the bad things that are being kept under the surface among Americans by the American sense of life, is now unleashed onto the world. And my fear is that the next leaders of this country are going to be a lot worse than Donald Trump, that he is setting the stage for something a lot worse. And look, you know, he said something the other day that nobody seems to have reacted to, or the reaction was very muted. He kind of said, and this was an internal meeting, and he was half joking, but the fact that he was joking says a lot. He said something about Xi, the Chinese leader. He said something about him just basically appointing himself for life, which is what Xi has just done. And Donald Trump said something kind of half jokingly about, yeah, it would be nice if we could do that over here in the United States, right? And just think of that. I mean, and he said that, yeah, jokingly, and he said that in front of friends, not publicly, but so what, right? Imagine if Obama had said that. Imagine if the right-wing press would have blown up. Fox would have dedicated 24 hours nonstop coverage to Obama declaring he wants to be a dictator. And here, even though all the media is left-wing, it barely made the news. I mean, it was here and there, people talked about it, but it barely made the news. And certainly the right ignored it completely. And then, of course, couple that with Donald Trump from the beginning of the campaign, his love affair with Vladimir Putin, all the nice things he said of Vladimir Putin, you know, including, in a sense, justifying his killing of journalists by saying, well, we all kill people, all countries kill people, which I saw live. So that's, you know, I saw him say it, right? And the video exists out there. You can go check it. So, you know, I don't know. It's this trade stuff is so depressing for somebody who's been working for 25 years. Yeah, 25 years. I'm trying to educate people about economics and about philosophy and the interaction between economics and philosophy and the role of government and all of this stuff. I mean, this is just a massive slap in the face. This is just, you know, failure. We failed because, you know, even the people who follow me on Facebook and Twitter don't get it. So never mind the general public. It's just, and I spoke in front of a group of Republicans yesterday and they don't get it. And yeah. Sorry, Jonathan.
No, thank you for the response. And if I can quickly just say, I mean, I don't know if it seems like it's the sanction of the victim again, because as you said, so many people who know better, who are not speaking up at a time that they should be on this type of policy. Thanks again, Yaron.
Sure, it's in a sense a sanction of the victim, but it's also, I think in this case, because they're not directly as much the victim. I mean, they are the victim, but not as quite as directly. It's really the silence of the good, right? Ayn Rand said, and I think she was paraphrasing Lord Acton or somebody, that it is when the good is silent that evil succeeds. Right? Evil succeeds when the good is silent. That's a truth.
Right.
And it's good silence, and it's so upsetting. But then the other upsetting part is there's so few good. There's so few people. But yes, the silence is thundering and really, really depressing. All right, I think we've got time for a few more questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, about the OAC. Are any of these people becoming like K through 12 teachers or?
Yeah, actually, a lot of them are. So a lot of the OAC graduates over the last 15 years have become teachers. Most of them at what are, you know, effectively schools run by objectivists. So the Van Damme Academy has a lot of OAC grads. The LaPorte Academy has a lot of OAC grads. The stuff that, what's it called? High Ground or High Road or something, which is another educational product, manager of schools has a lot of OAC grads. So they actually, and then there's a number of objectivists who are involved in developing curriculum, and some of them are OAC grads. So there's a lot, actually a a fairly large percentage of OAC graduates have landed up in kind of educational positions in primary schools all the way up to developing curriculum for middle schools. I don't think we might even have some people in high schools, but certainly in those grades, we have quite a few. All right.
Yaron,
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to say, and my coworkers at U.S. Steel, I tried to explain to them about the tariffs, but one of the things they keep flipping out about is like, oh, if nobody sells us, if we don't have any steel here, and then the world cuts us off, and then there's a war, then we'll lose because we won't have any tanks and stuff. You heard that one? They don't listen to me.
And there's a certain legitimacy to that, but I'd say two things. One, Canada and Mexico are the two largest importers of steel to the United States. And last time I looked, they were allies of ours. And I don't think we're going to go certainly with Canada. So really, are you worried about Canada embargoing the U.S. about steel? I mean, the worst case scenario, we invade Canada and take their steel mills if we have to. With war and everything. And the same is true of Mexico. And then the other thing is, if you study history, then what you can see in World War I and in World War II is how quickly the U.S. mobilized, reallocated its productive capacity towards building weapons. It is truly stunning how quickly that happened. And it happened because we were a capitalist economy. It happened because entrepreneurs are pro-America. They want America to be successful. So they jump in and they shift their means of production to producing the kind of weapons needed to win a war. So it is not true that it takes a long time to bring up a steel mill or bring up a weapons industry or everything like that. And again, World War I and World War II, evidence of that. I mean, I think it's U.S. Steel just announced that they're taking an old steel mill and hiring 500 people and starting it up again. Well, I mean, that's a waste because U.S. Steel, sorry, Jennifer, are not very good at producing steel relative to the world economy, the global marketplace. It's just not that competitive. But imagine if there was an emergency, how many steel mills are out there that could be, in a relatively short period of time, be engaged, if you will. And maybe the U.S. government should pay the steel companies. Here's an idea. The U.S. government pays steel companies some money to keep, whoops, I don't know what I did there, to keep some of the, some steel mill capacity on hold in case of an emergency. I mean, there are lots of solutions if you really care about these things, if that is a real worry.
Yeah, I told somebody that just the other day about there could be a reserve that the government holds, you know, for emergencies or whatever. You could do that. And we have U.S. Steel has mills right in Canada too. So I don't know what they're talking about.
I know. I mean, it's all, I mean, I'm sure the steel mills in Mexico are U.S. companies who moved at some point to do production in Mexico. It's just, the whole thing is mind boggling. It's just stupid.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating. And it's, you know, one of the things, you know, and I don't know if Amy was planning on talk about trade on the show this afternoon, but some of this we might be preempting. One of the things I read in the Wall Street Journal just, I think the other day was Brazil is the #2 exporter of steel to the United States. Again, not exactly an enemy of the United States, Brazil. And it turns out that Brazil, in order to make the steel, because you have to make steel, steel is not a raw material, you make steel, right? They use a particular type of coal. You have to use a particular kind of coal to make the steel. I mean, Jennifer, you know more about this than I do. And where do you think they get the coal? Where do they get the coal?
U.S.?
Yeah, they get it from the U.S. So basically, by reducing imports of steel from Brazil, we're going to destroy the American coal business, right? Which Donald Trump vowed to be the most pro-coal president ever, right? So if he was pro-coal, he'd be pro-Brazilian steel. And you could go on and on and on. And this is the thing about economics. This is an important point I want to make about economics. Economics is always about the second and third and fourth and fifth level effects of any action. It's not about the first level effects. And if you want to fully understand this point, if you want to actually understand how to think from an economics perspective, read Economics in One Lesson. Economics in One Lesson. It's a simple book. It's probably the most important book you could read quickly to really gain knowledge in economics. It's all about the broken window fallacy, and it's all about this idea of look at the second and third and fourth level effects of any economic policy. But again, to be anti-tariffs is to be pro-individual rights. You don't need more than individual rights to understand that the tariffs are wrong. All tariffs do is penalize Americans. Yes, it also penalizes the importer, the company in the other country. But the reason it's penalizing them is because you're penalizing your own people. You're forcing them to pay a higher price than they should for a good, and therefore you're reducing their options, you're reducing their wealth, you're reducing the choices that they have. So the fundamental is you're penalizing Americans. There's an effect on companies in China and Brazil and Canada, but it's a secondary effect. And why are you trying to penalize them, right? I guess you're trying to penalize them because they get subsidies from their governments. But why not benefit from the fact that their governments are subsidizing them to get cheap stuff into this country? All right.
Yes, you're right.
Anybody, one last question? Somebody who hasn't asked, a Space Wanderer or Ursula or Adriana, just jump in.
Hi, Aaron, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh yeah, that's grand. I wanted to ask a quick question about your conversation that you had with Sarganova Cat. In the end, it's somewhere in a safe location. Well, from what I understand, he doesn't accept objectivism because he has a problem with the self-interest, and he keeps saying that self-interest is something that you're born with. There is no decision making involved there, therefore it can't be a basis for kind of your ethics and so on. Like, well, what is your reaction to it? Because it seems, I mean, just from experience, you're not born 100% rational. It's something that you have to develop.
No, and he didn't disagree with that. I mean, the problem with what he was saying was it was not really coherent. So on the one hand, he said everybody acts in their self-interest, and then I said, look, but they, what do you call it? Short-term pleasure is not necessarily self-interest, and people inflict pain on themselves all the time. And he accepted the idea that there's such a thing as rational long-term self-interest. But then he wouldn't actually separate it from self-interest. And then he said, well, none of this has anything to do with morality. So I came to the conclusion that there are a number of problems here. One is he has no real conceptualization of what morality means, what it is, what it's supposed to do. He views it like Adam Smith does, and as I think to some extent Jonathan Haidt does, who he was quoting, which is morality is observational. We can see how people are acting morally and what is morally and what isn't, and then we try to explain it. I think Adam Smith's project in the theory of moral sentiments is not to tell people this is how you should behave. He's trying to explain how good people behave. So he's already decided who's good and who's bad. And then he tries to explain how good people are behaving, but there's no challenging of the idea of what is good and what is bad, what is morality, what is the purpose of morality, who should be the beneficiary of morality. None of that is even, it's a construct already. So I don't really think he understands what morality is and what are the questions morality asks, and that morality is there to give us guidance. He's already accepted, in a sense, altruism is moral. That is morality, and he can't think outside of that. I think the other problem is epistemological. And this is common. So that the first problem is a problem very prevalent in the culture. He's not the only one who has this. And the second one is too, and that is that he can't think in principle. So the idea of having a principled view of self-interest and what it entails, and then you have to have principles that you live by that don't change because of the urges of the moment. That whole way of thinking in terms of principles, it's why he can say, oh, I believe in free market, but we need an NHS. I believe in free market, but there have to be all these exceptions. What about the roads or whatever? They all always go to the roads. Is again, inability to think in principle. And the principle here would be individual rights. He said, oh, I'm for individual rights, except, and then you list all the exceptions, right? That's unprincipled thinking. Instead of the way I view the roads is, I'm for individual rights. Government funding the roads would be a violation of individual rights. So I wonder how you would do it without government funding of roads. How would that work? So it creates a question, and I don't necessarily know the answer to that question. I think I do in the case of roads, but I don't claim to know the answer to every one of those questions. But I'm not going to violate my principles because I happen not to be able to come up with a solution to a particular question as arising. The principle of individual rights is what dictates everything else in politics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was wondering if to some extent, I remember there was a discussion going on about cocaine and whether you can take cocaine today and then be fine tomorrow. And when I listened to that, I thought, well, oh my God, I mean, obviously any sort of addiction, I mean, cocaine is addictive. Alcohol is addictive. He came across as somebody who doesn't understand a human person as something that, as someone who exists in time, and therefore what I do today will have a snowball effect on tomorrow and after tomorrow and next week.
Yeah, and that's pragmatism. That's the inability to think in principle or to accept principles. It's also a lack of understanding of the idea that a human being has a nature. And again, if you think about, you have a nature and therefore you have to function based on that nature, again, requires you to think in abstractions and in principle. And I don't think he can do any of that. Or he hasn't learned how to do it. I mean, part of the reason to engage him is that at least he seems open to talking about it and maybe to changing, although that would be very unusual for somebody like that to change, but it would be great if it happened.
And does it surprise you? Because I didn't hear about him. I've never heard about him before you mentioned him on a program. So I went on YouTube, kind of did a bit of research, and he seemed to be kind of, he's not a stupid guy. I mean, he's an intelligent person, well-educated.
Well, and but he's not well-educated. He's self-educated, but that's part of the problem. Right. Most people today who are smart and knowledgeable can't think in principle. You go to CEOs of corporations, you go even to scientists, you go to across the board, the one thing that people seem to reject is the idea of principle. And then to try to think in terms of morality is another huge challenge that people just don't know how to do. So I wasn't surprised. I've met him before, so I knew what I was getting into. But I'm not surprised. I meet people like this all the time. You go round and round in conversations with them, and it doesn't go anywhere because the way you're thinking and the way they're thinking is very, very different. You're thinking over each other, particularly when it comes to morality, because we're so conditioned from when we're little kids to think in terms of altruism, to think in terms of how do we behave to other people, to think in terms of that is altruism, and egoism or self-interest is fulfilling my desires right now. And that's it. And that's the only two options. And yeah, there's this rational stuff over here, and they don't know how to fit that in. They don't know what to make of it. They know that's right. They know that's good, but they can't fit it in anywhere because it doesn't, that's another interesting thing. And I need to talk to one of our philosophers about. People tend to categorize things in twos, left and right, intrinsicism, subjectivism, altruism, self-destructiveness, right? Which is selfishness in their view. They can't think of a third alternative. And it has to do something with the way our mind works, but it's really difficult to get people to think outside of the box. And their box is usually very well defined. And they can only think outside of the box in terms of somebody else's box. And there are only two boxes. That's it. So,
yeah, no, it's interesting, but it's also interesting to see people who are really clever and yet, like you said, CEOs and politicians, economists, etc., not stupid people who just can't think outside of the box.
Yep.
And you wonder, well, why? Is it simply the problem with our education system? And you already discussed that we really kind of teach people to tick the box, pass exam, and forget about the whole thing. Do we really educate them into thinking, into critical thinking?
We don't. I think it's a combination of educational system and our religions, and the fact that they're both so entrenched and dominate our childhood and you know, in ways that affect the way we think about the world. So religion distorts our metaphysics and our epistemology, and education distorts epistemology and our, you know, and our ethics. So all three of them are distorted by both. And it's very difficult to overcome. I mean, and there are a lot of really smart people out there. I mean, think about somebody like Sam Harris, who talks about making the right choices all the time, but claims there's no such thing as free will. So one has to ask, who's making a choice? What does a choice mean in the absence of free will? Or think about a Steven Pinker, who gets so much about reason and rationality and reality right, and then gets, for example, economics, everything to do with economics and human behavior and political freedom all wrong. So it really is interesting to see really, really smart, knowledgeable, successful people completely get a lot, you know, all this other stuff wrong. And it just proves, I think, that given the cultural context in which we live, given the state of human knowledge, particularly for young people, objectivism is really, really hard. All right, I actually have to end it here because I am on with in like 19 minutes. So we're gonna stop this broadcast, and we're gonna in 19 minutes we'll be rebroadcasting live the Yaron and Amy show. So stay tuned. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, just stay on that page, and you'll get the new feed in a little while. All right. Thanks, everybody. This is the first time we've done this, not the last time. We'll do this on a regular basis. Thank you for participating, and talk to you all soon. Have a great rest of the weekend. Bye, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great.